Good afternoon, and welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online for Wednesday, February 5th, 2025. My name is Drew Clark, publisher and CEO of Broadband Breakfast, where we believe in better broadband, better lives. We are a community and news organization focused on high-capacity internet, how we get it and what we do with it when we have it. We're actually 1 month away from the 5th year anniversary of doing this weekly webcast podcast that's live online every Wednesday. We're very excited. We haven't actually even planned our anniversary. Well, we have to figure something out for that big day, Friday, March 13th, 2020, when everything seemed to shut down and broadband became all that much more important for keeping everyone connected around everything, around business, personal, social, emotional. I mean, what you have it. Everything kind of came together, and obviously, Broadband Breakfast has been around longer than that. We do and report on news every day, a lot from Washington, but also a lot from the states, covering state broadband offices, covering cities and their broadband projects, covering the latest deployments in landline and wireline and wireless technology. And one of the things that I wanted to say as we gear into our program today, we have recently, last week, we just announced our next in-person event is taking place on March 27th here in Washington. It's called Data Centers, Nuclear Power, and Broadband, a one-day summit on the role of AI infrastructure and the energy needs that they and broadband have from them. And of course, we're here every Wednesday with new sessions. Today, we're going to be talking about spectrum and next steps for spectrum auction renewal. But in coming weeks, i.e. next week, we're going to be talking about affordable broadband and what's next for the future of affordable broadband. And we just announced our February 19th event on the new convergence, fiber and wireless. So we're always planning, thinking about. If you've got any great ideas for topics, hey, send them along to events@breakfast.media, and we will certainly consider them. I also just need to give a great thanks to the sponsors and supporters of Broadband Breakfast that enable us to do this free online event every Wednesday. Today, we're going to be featuring our sponsor, NCTA, the Internet and Television Association. NCTA members are innovators and creators, an industry building the most powerful broadband platform and creating exciting TV programming that entertains, informs, and inspires consumers every day. NCTA's vision is for a technology and entertainment future that will advance innovation, inspire creativity, and unleash connectivity. Learn more at ncta.com. And some of our NCTA sponsors and members may be interested in the secure and undisclosed location I'm at. This is actually not undisclosed. This is the place that C-SPAN began 45 years ago this year, this studio at the National Press Club. And I do it many weeks here, not every week, but it's a nice place, and hopefully it's at least quiet and well lit. But with that, let's go ahead and bring our panel on. We are very excited to welcome different points of view on this topic. We again try to get all kinds of diversity and points of view in backgrounds. Even we have a lot of Washington wonks on our show, absolutely, but we also really bring the people from the communities, from the states, and we'll certainly be doing that in coming weeks. But turning to our topic, we're going to hear first from Michael Calabrese, who's no stranger to the Broadband Breakfast audience. He's the director of the Wireless Future Program and senior advisor at the Open Technology Institute at New America. And in that capacity, he's focused on spectrum policy, wireless broadband, satellite, and digital equities broadly. And he's been on the U.S. Department of Commerce Spectrum Management Advisory Committee since 2009. So he is extremely well versed in all things wireless. Michael, thanks for being with us again. He'll be followed by Doug Brake, who is the Assistant Vice President of Policy Communications at CTIA, the Wireless Association. Doug has also been a previous panelist at Broadband Breakfast Live Online. He'll be telling about what the wireless carriers think of this issue. It's clearly one of the most important issues for CTIA, and Doug's been engaged in broadband and spectrum issues for more than 10 years, even before CTIA, where he worked in government at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, and before that at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. And obviously, big news just 2 days ago regarding NTIA. President Trump has announced the appointment of Ariel Roth to be the administrator of NTIA. She will need to undergo Senate confirmation. I understand that Howard Lutnick has just been voted out of either the I haven't got the news flashes. It's the full committee or the Senate. One of the two happened this morning. But anyway, she will be working for Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Department secretary, and then NTIA is one of the agencies within the Commerce Department. Very important agency for us. And anyway, we'll I'm sure talk about NTIA's role as well as the FCC's role in spectrum today. We have following Doug, we're going to be able to hear from Brooke Donnellan. Brooke has been the Vice President of Government Affairs at NCTA, the Internet and Television Association, for 7 years now. Before joining NCTA, she served as Chief of Staff for FCC Commissioner Michael O'Reilly and spent 6 years in Congress, including as a Deputy Chief of Staff for Senator Ron Johnson, and she oversaw communications issues for the Senate Commerce Committee. Thank you for being with us, Brooke. We're excited to hear from NCTA and its perspectives on spectrum. And you wouldn't necessarily, I mean, like from the common point of view, people think, well, why is the cable industry, as some people still call it, focused on spectrum? Well, I'm sure Brooke's going to tell us why. And it's obviously a very, very important issue for NCTA as well as many others. And then batting cleanup, we're going to hear from Jennifer McCarthy. Jennifer is a telecommunications regulatory attorney with more than 30 years of experience working in the field of wireless and the wireless sector. And she has worked for Federated Wireless, Qualcomm, NextWave, and MVP Capital. And her experience involves the regulatory and government affairs activities interfacing U.S. and national regulatory authorities worldwide. And she also headed the Regulatory Advisory Committee of the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, as well as the CSMAC that we just heard about earlier. So anyway, enough with introductions. Let's turn it over to our panelists. Michael, tell us what's happening and what's the next step for Spectrum Auction Authority.
Yeah, thanks, Drew, and thanks for hosting this. Great timing, since this issue will be coming up, I believe, in Congress very soon, especially since FCC Auction Authority expired nearly 2 years ago.
3 years
for the first time ever. Oh, right, he's coming up around 3. So, for just as background, for many years I've worked on spectrum policy on behalf of a broad coalition of consumer, school, library, and other groups seeking to narrow the digital divide and lower the cost of connectivity. And we have long advocated for a balanced spectrum policy that expands spectrum access, not only with large exclusive use mobile licenses, but also for unlicensed use, especially Wi-Fi, that is free to everyone, and shared spectrum for enterprise, rural broadband providers, schools, and other local users. And really that's been our spectrum policy to date, for the most part, fairly well balanced, and we have all 3 flavors of spectrum access to boost the ecosystem. So to begin, just mention a few key considerations I think members of Congress need to keep in mind. First, that budget reconciliation is a terrible way to fashion good spectrum policy. A reconciliation act is driven entirely by tax cuts and short-term revenue needs. That makes it difficult to fashion a balanced policy that includes more unlicensed, or in this case, most important, to find a win-win solution that opens military spectrum for shared use while protecting military operations from interference. Second, if Congress does renew FCC auction authority through budget reconciliation, it should pass a clean 10-year extension and not mandate specific bans for auction. It should leave that to NTIA and FCC to figure out. Requiring an auction of military spectrum is premature and a recipe for continued stalemate. Senators on the Armed Services Committee have insisted for years that key military operations must not be moved out or disrupted without the Pentagon's consent. In response to these national security concerns, under the National Spectrum Strategy, NTIA, in partnership with DoD and industry stakeholders, are currently studying two huge federal bands, more than 1,600 megahertz of mostly military spectrum. But for now, that's what it is. They're studies. Congress and the FCC should wait to see the results of the testing and the recommendations from those studies. And finally, the FCC can move ahead on some important spectrum priorities. Just 5 years ago, under Chairman Pai, during the first Trump administration, the FCC adopted a very balanced and pro-consumer spectrum policy. The C-band was, which is in the upper 3 gigahertz, right? So nearly 280 megahertz was cleared for 5G mobile use by auction, the largest auction ever by far. But almost at the same time, there was a huge increase in unlicensed shared access across the entire 6 gigahertz band for the next generation of Wi-Fi, 1200 megahertz. The new chairman was Commissioner Carr at that point, and he fully supported this balanced approach. So similarly, we believe that Chairman Carr can just step back into those shoes and extend both of these achievements. For example, there's another 200 megahertz available at the top of the 3 gigahertz band for 5G, clean, contiguous spectrum that can be cleared, we believe. And also, we can extend the unlicensed band above where it currently stops to make the big wide channels we need for the next generation of Wi-Fi 8. And finally, we need more mobile satellite spectrum that will help the rapidly emerging low Earth orbit satellite constellations promote direct-to-device innovation and competition. So all that work can begin even as Congress figures out or breaks the stalemate between the military and the mobile industry.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Let's go right into Doug Brake. Tell us your thoughts on this topic.
Sure, yeah. So thanks, Drew, and thanks to Broadband Breakfast for having me back. As you mentioned, it feels like it was a similar conversation we had about this time last year or so. I really enjoyed that discussion, but I got to admit it's a little disappointing. Here we are a year later, as you mentioned, nearly 3 years after we lost auction authority, and we're still talking about the need to renew. I'm hopeful that it seems like momentum is building in the right direction. But yeah, looking forward to getting into the discussion. As Drew mentioned, I'm with CTIA, the primary trade association representing the wireless industry in the United States. And we at CTIA strongly support renewing the FCC's auction authority, supplying it with a pipeline of licensed spectrum identified for auction. I'm looking forward to discussing where we are in that process, and how we get there. But up front, I wanted to make the case that Congress should include a healthy, forward-looking pipeline that prioritizes unleashing more licensed full power spectrum for commercial use. I want to go through three quick reasons why we believe there's a strong case for more full power licensed spectrum. First of all, we need more licensed spectrum to meet growing demand. Second, we need more licensed spectrum to keep up with our peers and rivals. And third, we need more licensed spectrum to get us closer to a balanced approach to spectrum policy. So first on that demand question, wireless data traffic continues to skyrocket. Last year, again, we saw the largest increase in mobile traffic. So 36% increase from the year before, nearly double the amount just 2 years prior. We expect to see that grow 3 times over again by 2029. Simply put, we need more spectrum to keep up with that traffic growth. If we don't get more spectrum, we risk networks growing increasingly congested, threatening material degradation in performance. Users will see more buffering, more dropped calls, or otherwise restricted output. This would be a disaster for our economic and ultimately our national security, considering how wireless provides a core platform for American innovation and economic growth. Researchers estimate that we need 400 megahertz by 2027 and over 1400 megahertz by 2032 if we're to keep up with demand. So that's about the rough amount that we should be looking for if we're going to avert this looming spectrum crisis. Second, we need more spectrum to keep up with our peers and rivals. Other countries see this same demand curve, right? They also see what a decade of wireless leadership did for us in the United States in the 4G era, and they're taking aggressive action to license more spectrum for their own networks. In terms of the critical mid-band spectrum, today the US is behind on average of 200 megahertz behind our peers and rivals, which we fear will grow to an average of over 500 megahertz deficit by 2027. So we need more licensed spectrum to keep pace with other countries. And third, we also need more licensed spectrum to achieve a balanced approach to spectrum policy. Today, unlicensed has 300% more mid-band spectrum. Federal users have access to 600% more mid-band than licensed users. We're not asking for perfect equipoise here, but we're clearly very unbalanced today. I think those are the 3 key reasons why we need auction authority renewed, and we need it paired with a pipeline of licensed spectrum. With that, back to you, Drew. Looking forward to the conversation.
All right. Thanks for giving back some time there. We're excited to get into the discussion as soon as we hear from our other panelists. So, Brooke, the floor is yours. Tell us at NCTA and your perspective on this.
Thank you. And again, I appreciate you inviting NCTA to the conversation. As you started, it might be odd for NCTA to be part of this, but I'm here to kind of explain why we're at the table and why it's important that we get more spectrum available across the board on a balanced policy. As Michael and Doug both said, I think you'll hear the word balance a lot today. Cable companies, we use spectrum from a multitude of ways. First, Wi-Fi. We're putting in 10 gigabit speeds into your home, but if you don't have Wi-Fi that's able to handle those speeds, you're not going to get that benefit as a consumer. Second, cable companies are growing as the 4th largest wireless provider in the country. Comcast and Charter alone have 17 million subscribers and are providing competition and lower prices to consumers on the wireless front. So, we'll talk about shared spectrum, we'll talk about exclusive spectrum, and we'll talk about unlicensed spectrum. I think just to kind of piggyback off Doug's original points, demand, we think spectrum policy should reflect consumer demand. And let's face it, the majority of consumers are using spectrum on Wi-Fi. 82% of Doug's members are offloading their spectrum onto Wi-Fi. Cable companies, it's closer to 90%. Consumers are largely using spectrum indoors and they're using it on Wi-Fi. So, when we talk about spectrum policy, we need to look at how the consumers are actually using the spectrum. I think when we're talking about our peers in other countries, let's lean into our strengths. Let's focus on where America is strong, and America is strong on Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is an American success story. It is a decentralized network, something that China does not necessarily like. So let's lean into where we're strong, not to where China's strong. I think it's really challenging when you get into these megahertz to megahertz debates because we are talking about apples to oranges comparisons. Exclusive spectrum is exclusive. It is high power. and it is owned by one individual or company. Unlicensed spectrum is shared. It is low power, and anyone can come in and innovate in those space. We call it the innovation band. So we like to say, think about your private backyard versus a public park. We can't really compare, obviously the public park is bigger, but it's used by everyone versus your private yard. So, I think it's a little dishonest when we try to compare megahertz to megahertz because it's kind of an apples to oranges comparison. Happy to chat. I am way more of a Hill person than a regulatory person, so definitely happy to provide perspective on what Congress is doing and get into that conversation as we talk about Renew and Auction Authority, which NCTA supports. So that's all I'll do for now.
Well, Brooke, we will very much get into the politics of it because that's really quite central to the discussion and the lapse in authority that took place in March 2022. All right, Jennifer, bring us home. Give us your perspectives on this topic.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you, Broadband Breakfast, for having me. I'm Jennifer McCarthy, most recently with Federated Wireless, which is one of the Spectrum Access System administrators for the Citizens Broadband Radio Service, CBRS band, in 3 gigahertz, as well as an automated frequency coordinator, AFC system operator for the unlicensed shared band at 6 gigahertz. So Federated has a lot of experience in trying to help us have our cake and eat it too. We've got incumbents occupying a lot of spectrum, and we've got a lot of new users, as Brooke and Doug and Michael all indicated, who want access to spectrum for a variety of use cases, not just consumer use cases. We've got industrial users, private wireless users that also need spectrum. And I think you're seeing decisions to make spectrum available in new ways, new licensing models, such as the CBRS licensing model, which has some auction spectrum and some licensed by rule options for different users to take advantage of. That's a great model, and one we should be considering as we're looking at what to do, not only here without auction authority, because the commission has the ability to use license by rule as a way to make more spectrum available for mobile network operators, for the cable companies, for schools, libraries, and private wireless industrial users. But then we've also got, the unlicensed approach that they've taken for 6 gigahertz. But in all of these cases, we've got to recognize that sharing has got to be a way of the future. And we've got the technology and the software and the capabilities to make sharing achievable so that DoD can continue with its critical missions, the other federal agencies that need access to spectrum, the incumbent users in other bands can more efficiently, hopefully, use that spectrum, but we can find ways to maximize it using technology that we've developed here in the United States that works extremely well and is really the technology of the future in terms of spectrum management. And I think we've got to stop looking at this as a zero-sum game and instead start leveraging the capabilities that we've developed to find a way to enable everybody to get access to the spectrum that they need, rather than continuing this tug of war that has been unfortunately going on for several years. And let's just change the nature of the game completely and start figuring out how to access spectrum quickly, efficiently, and in a way that spreads some love around for lots of different users and use cases. So thank you, Drew.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for keeping it concise. I want to just, again, we try to define the terms, make sure everyone's on the same page. At the very start of your presentation, Michael, you referenced the 3 flavors of wireless, and I'm not sure we got a definition of that. And so if I'm understanding you correctly, you're basically saying sort of licensed exclusive use being one flavor, unlicensed kind of with the public park, another flavor, innovation. But there's the third one that maybe it's just worth teasing out just a little bit more, the kind of the combination, the share. This is where CBRS is taking place, right? The potential of the C-band. Michael and Doug too, what are your thoughts? Is that the right lens through which to look at spectrum, the three flavors of regimes?
Yeah, from my perspective, it is. And, Jennifer just told us a little bit about that relatively new third flavor, which is, shared license by rule access to the airwaves. So, the way another way to think of it is as a sort of evolution. We began, in the early 90s with mobile, the initial mobile networks and auctions. In the US was first in the world to use auctions, and the goal, the industrial policy of the FCC was to get nationwide coverage, so contiguous coverage, either regionally through regional carriers or nationally, which is exemplified now by particularly the three big national mobile carriers. And so to accomplish that, that coverage, they used, or what they gave out was licenses for exclusive use, where the spectrum, these frequency bands are controlled completely by the mobile carrier, and they can guarantee not only wide coverage, but quality of service that way. But then, Wi-Fi came along, and we found that it was not only less expensive, particularly indoors, but also better, faster throughput and better signal strength if you could just connect to your wireline. Say if you're a cable customer, you just connect your Wi-Fi to your cable line, and then you have within a short range at low power, great connectivity. And so that's the unlicensed. But unlicensed is also increasingly for the Internet of Things. There's hundreds of millions of devices.
And to kind of close out the point, I think you're suggesting that this licensed by rule regime, the shared, that's kind of a new evolution, a next step after.
That's right. And CBRS just.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. My last point would be that CBRS is a really interesting hybrid between that, the Citizens Broadband Radio Service, hybrid between licensed and unlicensed, because what we've done is we've allowed direct local access to the airwaves at relatively low cost. So half the band was auctioned. Priority access licenses were auctioned, but because the license areas are small, new entrants like the cable, as Brooke said, there's 17 million. The cable industry has 17 million mobile subscribers now using a Wi-Fi first model, which they're enhancing with CBRS, but also schools, John Deere, manufacturing complexes, ports, schools,
Right.
libraries. So it's both. There's also a free to use half of the band, and that shares with the US Navy at low power. It works around the Navy by sharing, so you don't have guaranteed quality of service at all times, but you do have much more intensive shared use of the band at lower cost.
So we'll definitely come back to military, but Doug, I just want to, again, get your perspective. Is that the right way to look at this, or do you have an alternative paradigm, if you will?
Yeah, no, I mean, big picture, I don't have a lot to disagree with. But I do think we get a little confused when we kind of break it down in terms of sharing versus exclusive. In reality, even licensed spectrum, like our members use, is intensively shared in a couple of different ways, right? Not only are there bands where licensed users are effectively sharing with the military and over time working to refine that sharing. There are great examples like AWS 3 or 3.45 where we've seen real success in exclusive licenses working alongside military and other federal users on the same frequencies. I think it's also important to keep in mind that licensed spectrum used by the mobile industry is intensively shared among its end users, right? These licenses are used to build general purpose networks on which millions of Americans are able to leverage to carry out all sorts of, wide variety of different activities over the internet, right? Enables tremendous innovation. So when you talk about CBRS enabling sharing among additional licensees, right? It's like you might get some more licenses than you do with exclusive auctions, right? But you don't see nearly the same level of ultimate sharing among the end users. So I think we get a little confused when we kind of skirt along with this high level language. I personally think it's better to actually look at the architecture and how the spectrum is being put to use. The mobile industry focuses on full power licensed spectrum that enables it to invest tremendous amounts, regularly over $30 billion a year, in building high quality networks that can provide reliable, strong connectivity. When you look at Wi-Fi, right, it's much lower power, allows for more reuse, so a tremendous amount of throughput that flows over Wi-Fi. It's distributed, but it's low power, and it just can't serve the same needs, the same functions as a full power mobile network. And then similarly with CBRS, right, it's somewhere in between, right? It's a little bit stronger power, at least some of the licensed versions than Wi-Fi, but still you need 7 to 8 times more infrastructure on a CBRS low powered license compared to a typical full powered license. So it's really a different beast. And I think it's better to think of along those terms, right? Of what kind of architecture do these enable? And so those 3 flavors, right? They serve different purposes, they serve different roles. But right now, I think the argument tilts in favor that we need more licensed spectrum today in order to bring us into better balance and keep pace with other countries.
Thank you very much. And to lead up to this event, I put out a bunch of questions, and I'm going to kind of collapse the first and second. What is the reason for the lapse in FCC Spectrum Auction Authority nearly 3 years ago? And okay, if it is in fact the gulf between commercial and military users of spectrum, what is the current status of that gulf between those perspectives? And let's let whoever wants to weigh in on this topic and supplement my hypothesis I put out there.
Well, I guess I can start, but I think you've heard on this panel, everyone tends to support renewing the FCC's auction authority. I think it's actually not that controversial in Congress that we should renew the auction authority. Congress in the last couple years has gotten bogged down on the lower 3 gigahertz band. It's a very important DoD band, and there's been debates between different industries and different congressional committees on how to address that. If Congress were to just do a clean renewal of auction authority, I don't think that would be controversial. I think where it gets controversial is when you start demanding that they legislate specific bands or a certain amount of spectrum, and that's where it starts to get concerning for the stakeholders that are currently occupying those said bands. So that's where we've seen the controversy the last 2 years. I think, the Congress will break that logjam in reconciliation. I think it's just too tempting to spend 60 to 90 billion dollars, or to use that as an offset, given all the priorities Congress has and reconciliation. So I do think Congress will actually renew auction authority this year through one of the reconciliation bills, whether there's 1, 2, or 3. And the question is, and the debate now is, how are they going to do that? Are they going to do, as Michael said, a 10-year clean? Or are they going to do, as Doug and CTIA are arguing, some type of pipeline associated with that? I would just, caution that reconciliation is not about spectrum policy. It is about spectrum as a pay for. And when you look at pipelines, and we all talk about balance.
Can you define that? Can you define what the difference between a 10-year clean renewal of auction authority versus a pipeline approach, Brooke?
So, for example, 10-year clean means 10-year clean. The FCC has auction authority for the next 10 years, from 2025 to 2035. 10-year plus pipeline, given that it's in reconciliation, it would be different if we were outside reconciliation. But think what CTIA is advocating for is a certain amount of megahertz associated with that auction authority. So you get a 10-year auction authority, plus you must auction 400 megahertz of spectrum. I don't want to speak for CTIA, but that's the gist of what I'm hearing. And, you know, I think our caution there is that as Congress looks for pay-fors, they are focused on raising revenue, not on making good spectrum policy. Unlicensed spectrum, unfortunately, via CBO raises $0 because you don't actually pay for unlicensed spectrum. You go in and you innovate, and then consumers get the benefit of that innovation, whether I'm a mom, so always looking at my baby monitor, but garage door clickers, Wi-Fi is, you know, our, of course, major success story. But, you know, there was a report that came out last year that Wi-Fi is going to generate $1.3 trillion to the GDP, yet it's going to score $0 when it is scored by CBO. So it's just, again, we want a balanced pipeline. And when you look at it through the lens of reconciliation, there is a challenge with getting that because of how CBO does scoring, not because of any policy.
Right. And Doug's name's been mentioned, so I've got to let him respond here. So what is CTIA's view? Brooke, you've heard what Brooke's view of CTIA's view is. What is your view of what CTIA's view is?
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel a little bit of like a broken record, but, you know, reiterate that I think renewing auction authority needs to be paired with a pipeline of identified spectrum to be auctioned. I don't think it needs to be, you know, specific bands. It doesn't need to get deep in the weeds, but it needs to point to how Congress feels this should be done, and what spectrum should be prioritized for license use, right? I find it a little bit amusing, all this, you know, reaction against using reconciliation. When you look to history, you know, every time that spectrum has been, every time that the auction authority has been renewed, it's been with a pipeline of identified bands to be auctioned. And 3 out of the 4 times that's happened, it's been done through reconciliation. So this should feel familiar. This isn't something at all out of the ordinary. This is normally how these sort of spectrum bills get done. And so I think we identify a significant amount of spectrum for auction. I think we've got Alan has introduced the Pipeline Act that I believe would put 1250 megahertz for license use. I think that's an excellent place to start. And yeah, I think that's the approach that makes sense to me. We identify a certain amount of spectrum and then leave it for NTIA to figure out the details. We get the engineers talking together, and once Congress has identified the goal and what we need to get done, then we get the engineers together to figure out how to get us there.
Jennifer, you haven't spoken to this yet, please.
Yeah, thank you. No, I'd like to echo something that both Michael and Brooke mentioned, which is, you know, why are we using auction proceeds to define spectrum policy? It seems that we're our priorities and the ability for FCC and NTIA to figure out what the right mix and the right licensing structure is. We're taking that away from them, despite what Doug just said about letting them figure out how to do it. By dictating a specific pipeline and a timeline for achieving those objectives and expecting certain revenues from that action, you are pushing those agencies in a particular direction and eliminating their ability to rethink how spectrum could be managed. And I think we need to encourage the federal agencies as well as the FCC to look at how we could be more efficient with our use, how we could ensure that spectrum is being put to the best use as quickly as possible. There's a lot of spectrum that has been auctioned that's sitting out there fallow, and people could be using it today if we had more efficient ways of getting that spectrum into people's hands. But if you conduct exclusive auctions over and over again, there really isn't a good incentive for those licensees to make that additional spectrum available. We have leasing, which could be one way of making that happen. But unfortunately, the way spectrum licenses are accounted for, there's a price discovery concern that most licensees have about the implications of leasing spectrum out at some lower rate than it would be devaluing their entire portfolio. So again, I think we've got accounting issues both at Congress in terms of how they're valuing spectrum and what they're using auctions for in terms of how it's scored, rather than looking at the overall benefit to the U.S. economy. And then I think we've got problems about how we're accounting for spectrum's value in a way that's making it underutilized when it gets exclusively licensed.
So can we take a question? We got some great questions coming in. An anonymous attendee asks, what will happen in the Trump administration to the national spectrum strategy? And we haven't really talked about this, but that was quite an effort in the last administration. So who wants to tackle that? And what are the kind of clues coming out of the Trump administration thus far about the way they will approach spectrum and the spectrum strategy? Michael, go ahead.
I'll just start by saying that, the national spectrum strategy focused primarily on identifying, its pipeline section, right, was to identify four very large bands for study, almost all of it federal spectrum, mostly military. And the focus has been on this lower 3 gigahertz that we've been talking about, as well as the 7 gigahertz band, all the way up to 8,400. And what it did was it laid out a process to study and do testing to see, what portions of those military bands in particular could be consolidated or cleared potentially to auction for high power, or conversely could be shared. In other words, the military not moving, as in CBRS, right? It's shared with the Navy, shared at lower power, which could and that some of that could be auctioned as well, but it would be lower power, smaller licenses. Or a third option could be used on an indoor only basis as unlicensed and Wi-Fi use large, portions of the 6 gigahertz band without interfering with the incumbents outdoors. So those studies are ongoing, and it would be wise for the administration to just, really continue those studies, because if Congress remains deadlocked, in part because the members of the Armed Services Committees are saying we need more facts, we need to understand how this impacts national security, that it's better to have those answers than to stop everything.
Other thoughts on that? We've got, please.
I agree with most all of what Michael says. Yeah, no, I think the national spectrum strategy under the Biden administration was certainly pointing in the right direction, right? Identifying key bands that we think are prime opportunities to find more efficient use and to free up spectrum for commercial access. I think he's right that it's like we have to build on what was accomplished. I think there are ways in which we can revisit some of and the Biden administration was already in the process of revisiting some of the studies with lower 3 that DoD conducted, revisiting the Embers report. And also I think there's opportunity to expand some of what is under consideration under the 7 and 8 gigahertz to look more closely at some of the upper portions of that band going forward. So I think it's, we don't want to start over from scratch. We've got a good start, and the studies are underway. There are ways in which we can kind of course correct and expand what's under consideration, but we're heading in the right direction at least.
We have a great question from Jimmy Schaeffler, and he asks, to the different panelists to give perspectives on what's the scope of value, let's say, in terms of adding spectrum to make it available via auction versus to not auction it off, right? Can we get different perspectives on, I don't know, value to the economy in the use this way, value to the Treasury? We recognize there's already been a point placed on the table about, unlicensed doesn't generate any income. So that seems like a pretty hard sell if you're going to Congress and saying, we can give you $0 from not licensing this. What's the sweetener? How do you make it more attractive to get Congress to be willing to go along with unlicensed spectrum? Again, let's get multiple perspectives on this.
And I guess since you mentioned unlicensed, I will just say, this is how consumers use spectrum. 82% of mobile traffic is offloaded onto Wi-Fi. You want to get gigabit speeds into your home, but you don't want to plug into an Ethernet cord, Wi-Fi. I mean, we're focusing on how consumers are using spectrum, and that is why, a recent report came out saying that unlicensed spectrum would contribute $1.3 trillion to the GDP. CBO shouldn't score unlicensed at zero. It shouldn't be your net revenue from an auction. Look at 3.4. Everyone says, oh, it raised $21 billion. No, it did not. The clearing costs for 3.4 were $13 billion. So now you're looking at, a $6 billion, to the Treasury, not $21 billion to the Treasury. So I think, when we're talking to Congress, we're talking about how consumers need spectrum. We're talking about, the overall impact of unlicensed technology to the economy. And we're talking about clearing costs. I mean, like the lower 3 gigahertz band is said to cost $120 billion to relocate in 20 years. If you share it, you don't have to relocate anyone. So you have to look at the relocation costs as well as, what an overall auction is going to generate.
And just to kind of explain what I think the implication of what you're saying is that is the military and the military use of spectrum going to be better served by not moving this lower 3 gigahertz band and figuring out a way to share it rather than relocating an auction? Is that kind of the point you're making, Brooke? And I'm wondering,
there's a cost associated with relocation. There is a time associated with relocation, and there is a national security impact associated with relocation. So Congress has to consider all of those factors. We talk about lower 3 gigahertz a lot. That's been a big focus of Congress the last couple years. 3.4 was part of that. DoD was operating in that band from 3.4 to 3.5. They were compressed to the lower 3 gigahertz. Now people are asking them to compress again. At some point, they cannot continue to compress. At some point, there will be no place for them to relocate to. We don't have this luxury of greenfield spectrum available. And so what we are advocating for is, let's look at the technologies that we have available to us that we didn't have in the 1990s. Let's look at how far these databases have come. Let's look at innovative ways to use spectrum as efficiently as possible so it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. The reason why we don't have auction authority is because certain industries have made this a zero-sum game. And what we need to do is focus on how we can make it a win-win.
Doug and Jennifer, please.
Doug, do you want to go ahead?
You can go ahead, Jennifer. That's fine.
I was just going to say, on that time to market issue, we're wasting time right now arguing about this rather than leveraging the tools and the capabilities we've got to start getting into these bands quickly. 3.1, for example, in the same way that the FCC allowed general authorized access, the license by rule part of CBRS, to start well before the PAL auction happened. That seeded the market. That got equipment manufacturers building equipment for CBRS and started launching hundreds of new deployments by a wide variety of users. We could do the same thing in 3.1 to 3.45. Open it up for licensed by rule, allow the carriers to get in there if they want to start using that spectrum on the same terms as everybody else. If we want to do an overlay PAL auction after the fact, priority access licenses, we can rearrange the use accordingly, but we can have both, as Brick was just saying. We could have some licensed version of that band, but we could also have the license by rule without waiting to have to clear it. We can get into the band and then adjust it as necessary going forward using tools that have already shown that they work and are proven. So, rather than, again, this tug of war fighting over, or is it a pipeline, not a pipeline, let the FCC and NTIA work this out and start using the capabilities we've already got and quit wasting time, frankly.
Doug.
But may just briefly, so to the actual question asked, right? It's like we're talking on the magnitude of hundreds of billions of dollars, right? Is the opportunity, particularly in terms of unleashing licensed spectrum. We just put out a study the other week that looked at each additional 100 megahertz of spectrum would add an estimated $260 billion to the GDP. So I think it's a tremendous magnitude of the opportunity, and really what's at risk if we don't get this right and get additional spectrum. I don't know. I found it kind of interesting in both Brooke and Jennifer's responses. There's a lot that I agree with, but it's like I come from a different perspective where it's like I think the answer of what the tools that we have available that have proven work quite well are licensed users working directly with the military to be able to free up that spectrum, right? Particularly when we're talking about lower 3, I also really strongly agreed with what Brooke is saying. Unfortunately, there has been this sort of like zero-sum thinking that's taken over, I think, in large part in parts of the defense community, right? We're all of a sudden this, for example, this clearing costs of $120 billion to clear out lower 3, it's going to take decades, right? It's like that's not something we have been asking for, that we've been advocating needs to happen. We think just a small portion, right? Less than half of the band could be freed up for exclusive use. You draw the line at 3.3, that meshes with the 3GPP standard for 5G that's already being deployed across the world, right? I think it's telling that the DoD and our allies are already able to operate the same radars that are being studied in lower 3 in dozens of countries around the world where 5G is already deployed in this band, right? We should be able to make the same accommodations, whatever DoD is doing to accommodate in those other countries. If they're tuning their radars to operate just in the lower portion of lower 3, which I think is likely what's happening, they should be able to make those same accommodations here, right? It's like this is imminently achievable if we're able to get in there and have these sorts of discussions of what do you need in order to achieve your mission effectively, and where can we, make some efficiency improvements, upgrade equipment, move away from decades-old systems like AWACS that are tremendously outdated, and find those sorts of opportunities and make more efficient use of the spectrum, and then can be licensed off for commercial use.
Let me get a couple of quick questions in from our audience here. One from Shaikh Firdaus asks, is there a killer app or application for 5G that we are anticipating other than fixed wireless access that would actually drive the demand for 5G? So that's one question. You can weigh in on that one. Or this other question, I guess this is to Jennifer from Red Dahab. Can you comment about the balance and demand of bandwidth availability in CBRS bands, as many ISPs are using this band as a general access band for the last mile? So actually, Jennifer, why don't you go ahead with that and see who else wants to weigh in?
So I might not have caught the whole question, but I think what I heard was, how are we seeing the CBRS band being utilized from a GAA perspective, the
That's
general
correct,
authorized access? Yeah, we've got hundreds of different users, different operators who are taking advantage of the GAA tier of CBRS, where the license by rule tier. And that runs the gamut. You've got mobile network operators using GAA. We've got cable companies using that as well. And then, as I said, hundreds of different schools, libraries, industrial users, big industrial users. We're talking John Deere, we're talking Chevron, we're talking Tesla, we're talking British Petroleum, BP. We've got so many different use cases in the GAA band. And I think it demonstrates that there is a need for what some people call carrier grade spectrum, which is more suitable for 3GPP type technologies. but without the burden and costs associated with acquiring a large license area. And the GAA license by rule approach enables that. And that's why we've got so many different users, use cases, and operators taking advantage of that licensing framework that is so novel, and one that other countries around the world are trying to replicate. They're doing it through very hyper local licensing, but basically they're trying to replicate what the US and the FCC did with the CBRS licensing framework.
And on the killer app, yeah, go ahead. Did you raise your hand, Michael or Doug? Go
Oh,
ahead.
yeah.
I'm happy to jump in if the question's about, the 5G killer app, right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I found it interesting is, the questioner framed it as other than fixed wireless access, though I think that's a tremendous success story, right there. I mean, that's I think one of the killer apps that we can expect. A great study put out a while back from Hal Singer looking at the tremendous competition that fixed wireless access is bringing to the cable industry for the home broadband services, right? They estimated that if fixed wireless was able to have sufficient spectrum so that operators could offer it everywhere, right? It's offered only in limited areas where there's sufficient capacity to cover both mobile and the fixed connection. So if there was sufficient licensed spectrum in the market, they estimate that the consumers would save over $8 billion a year due to the increased competition with the cable industry. So I think that's a tremendous opportunity and a real killer app. I think we're also seeing increasing chatter about the possibility that limited spectrum on mobile networks will constrain artificial intelligence applications, particularly in the upload direction. You see more and more applications that want to do cloud processing of real-time images or video, and to be able to provide that uplink, a little different directionality than the way mobile networks are designed today, to provide primarily more data in the downlink connection. So there's increasing concern that limited spectrum could limit the growth could be a potential bottleneck for artificial intelligence applications. So
Okay.
I think those are some of the key applications.
Good points. Michael, and then I've got a final question for everyone.
Can I just chime in real fast on that?
Go ahead, Brooke, yeah.
I would say there is no killer 5G app, but 5G has seen, this unleashing of competition and cable entering the wireless space and offering competitive pricing to the big three national wireless providers. And that's, again, when we talk about, 5G ecosystem competition, let's look at the whole ecosystem together. I mean, that's our kind of takeaway. Let's look at how consumers are using the spectrum. AI, people are developing AI indoors on their computer. That's through Wi-Fi. They're not doing it outside, So if you want good AI, let's get more Wi-Fi. If you walk the floors of CES this year, everything was running on Wi-Fi 7. Wi-Fi 7 cannot exist without more unlicensed spectrum. So, again, competition is my kind of takeaway from 5G. I don't think there has been a 5G app. There has also been fixed private 5G networks, which we've seen through CBRS. When you're talking about manufacturing, precision ag, stadiums, schools, libraries, they're able to set up their own private 5G network rather than go through the carriers, and so they've been able to do it at less expense. So I think that's also been a success of 5G. So I think it's really 5G gave us new opportunities. It wasn't just more spectrum, a new app. It was really these new convergences of the marketplace and new entrants into the marketplace that we hadn't seen before.
All right, Michael, do you have a quick comment before we go to our last question?
Yeah, just that I think what you just heard from Jennifer, Doug, Brooke points up, the larger theme that you need balanced spectrum policy and all three flavors of access to have the, really the best ecosystem. As a consumer advocate, we've been very happy to see, that, cable has 17 million mobile subscribers competing with the big three. Whereas on the flip side, as Doug said, now mobile has roughly 10 million, I think, fixed wireless competing, with cable and other telcos. But maybe most importantly, as we look ahead to 6G, what we're calling 6G is to recognize it's an ecosystem. As Jennifer mentioned, increasingly private IoT networks are going to need access to spectrum, and then we add in satellites, and it's really all four of these sources of connectivity that will be, the world's best 6G wireless ecosystem. It's not just mobile or any one of these by themselves.
All right. The final question I've got for everyone, let's just go in the same order we started in. What is the state of the various legislative proposals currently being discussed to restore spectrum auction authority and their likelihood of passage? So quickly, 30 seconds most. Michael.
Yeah, there's currently no proposal that, currently no legislation that has any chance of passing. What we heard about from Representative Allen based on Chairman Cruz's bill is just too much, goes way too far because it necessarily implies clearing military bands, before these studies are done. So that won't fly. Probably something like what got to the 1 yard line in December 2022, a bill that just extends auction authority and maybe sets a goal for some spectrum to be made available for both, in these different flavors, but leaves the details to NTIA and FCC.
All right, Doug, what do you think?
I would here I must disagree with Michael in part ways a little bit. I do think that the Thune-Cruz Spectrum Pipeline Act introduced last session is an excellent starting point, and Congressman Rick Allen's Pipeline Act building on that, I think, is where we begin. I don't think that it implies we necessarily have to clear military spectrum. Again, I go back to we can effectively license that spectrum and still share with the military. And so I don't think that this requires full clearing, and it has a good chance of passage, at least in a form very similar. So I think it's likely that this moves in reconciliation. I also know I saw reporting the other day that Senate Armed Services Committee Chair Roger Wicker has stated he's interested in finding a compromise with the Commerce Committee. So while there might be some important details yet to be worked out, I think that there's good, strong momentum and an eagerness to find a solution that gets this done.
Great. Brooke.
Yeah, I think Congress will land on the policy that raises the most money and causes the least amount of drama.
Okay. And what will that be?
We will to be continued. We will see. I don't think the Allen bill is lacking controversy, though.
All right. Jennifer.
I don't know if I can add anything to what my fellow colleagues here, what they're betting on. I would just caution folks, again, let's not have any words around clearing in this legislation. I don't think we should be mandating that that's how the spectrum should be put to use. Repurposing, sharing, those kinds of words, I think, are more helpful to this discussion and will enable us to start coming up with solutions faster than this ongoing debate will.
Before we thank each of our panelists, I want to remind you we're here every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. And next week in particular, we're going to welcome Federal Communications Commissioner Jeffrey Starks to kick off our conversation about the future of affordable broadband. And we'll also be hearing from a California Assembly member, Tasha Berner, about a California approach to affordable broadband. On behalf of our panelists and our guests watching, as well as our panelists, Michael Calabrese, Doug Brake, Brooke Dunelon, and Jennifer McCarthy, I'm Drew Clark, and we'll see you next Wednesday at 12 noon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.